Hello and welcome back to the Self-Comfort Diaries. This is a podcast where we explore the journey of self-care and inner peace. Join us today as we share stories, tips and heartfelt conversations that inspire you to prioritise your own comfort and well-being. Get ready to discover the joy of nurturing your mind and soul one episode at a time. Today we've got a very special guest called Sarah Bewers. She's a holistic life and leadership coach who's passionate about deepening our connection with both our minds and our bodies and helping people create the unique conditions they need to thrive. She works with individuals, leaders or teams, working at the crucial intersection between connection to purpose, self-leadership and health and well-being. I'm really excited to have her on today, and this is our conversation today. Hi Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Kate, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So where did you start with coaching and how did you get to where you are today with it?
Yeah, so my journey into coaching has kind of started probably about 5 years ago. I first had coaching myself in 2020, just after and around the time of the first lockdown back in pandemic days. And I continued working in the business I was in. But it was really interesting how coaching kind of connected with me. It helped me on a bit of a journey, I think that I was already on. But it really helped me with understanding myself better. It helped me understand where I was kind of getting in my own way, and just helped with a lot of people pleasing, perfectionism. And what was really driving me, I was very driven externally by living up to other people's expectations. So that journey kind of took me on a couple of years that really helped me work-wise and professionally. And then about 2.5 years ago, I made the decision to leave a job that was very intense, very stressful. There were some positive things about the environment, but it was really not aligned to me. The role wasn't aligned. It shifted. I'd learned loads in it, but I made a really intuitive decision to leave. And I didn't have something to go to. I knew I was going to work for myself. And I knew I was going to explore coaching. And I did. So I did an accredited with the International Coaching Federation. I did a course. And that took me sort of a year to complete. And I loved that journey. It was brilliant. And then since then, I've journeyed through looking more into not just sort of psychological elements of coaching. I realise, we spend a lot of time in our heads, and that's so useful and so important to understand how we think. But it's also really important to bring our body into it. We're not just a brain. And now I run a business called Lead with Health, and that tries to look at health more broadly. But it also, works with coaching people, individuals, leaders, businesses, teams. And I love that journey.
So how did you find was there something that really was like a pinpoint and like a challenge that you faced that kind of allowed you to go into this? Or was there any like personal struggles or anything like that which kind of led you to sort of go, I want to do this coaching because I want to help other people type thing?
Yeah, I think it's funny, if I'd answered that even 2 years ago, or even a year ago, the answer is always different because hindsight and perspectives gives you so much. And I love that. I'll be a different coach in a year and 10 years than I am now. And that's the beauty of it. We're always changing and growing. I think right now, when I think about that, I really know that my interest in well-being more broadly, as well as sort of coaching, is a lot around the experiences. One particular experience at the beginning of 2020, before the pandemic, and which kind of kicked off my relationship with the coach I had then. I completely and totally burnt out. I had far too much on my plate. I was running at 100 miles an hour. And I really didn't, at that point, understand sort of how that all came about. Like when we think about burnout, or we talk about stress a lot, we think about doing lots of things. And actually, as humans, we have a huge capacity to do a lot of things. It's whether or not it's aligned and the reason why we're doing those things. You look at lots of people who are doing wonderful, amazing things. And if it's coming from within, they can get up really early, they can go to bed late, they've got multiple things, they've got a family, they've got a job, they've got a side hustle. yes, of course, sometimes those people can burn out, but I think a lot of the connection is if it's doing it for someone else, if you're not doing it from within, if it's not aligned to you, or you're in the wrong conditions, whether that's mental, physical, emotional, social, spiritual, whatever that means, if you're not aligned to what's right for you, we're trying to do things because we think people want us to, or we think we're trying to live up to some expectation, that's when we can burn out. And I really, really experienced that at the start of 2020. And strangely enough for me, that period of lockdown, I was on furlough for a while, was a real wake-up call. I was given permission to stop.
Yeah.
And the rest of the
whole
world did too.
slowed down, didn't it? Which was kind of, it was different for different people for different ways, but it made everyone slow down and think, and that's what was so powerful about it.
And I appreciate a lot of people had a really negative experience during that time. I feel very lucky that I didn't. But it was this weird experiment, and that for me, I never, even if I'd taken 2-3 months off myself, I wouldn't have had the same experience because I would have been choosing that, and I would have felt some sort of maybe guilt about it. But I was given permission, and everything slowed down, and it was just that. It sounds so cliched, and a lot of the talk around that time of people who had positive experiences probably sounds like this, but it really was life-changing for me. That burnout and that time to pause, and then the sort of relationship with just space and just being, not always doing. And then my journey after that, which did then take me back into a really intense role. But I think something stayed with me. And I really, I really just started to peel back the layers of understanding, why am I doing X? Why am I doing Y? What am I sort of chasing here? Why have I made these decisions? Who am I doing this role or that role for? Is it for me, or is it because I think I'm supposed to? So it really started to peel a lot of that back. So that was a really pivotal time for me, I think. And there probably were, I think, times earlier in my career where I had sort of shifted and changed. But it all kind of led to that. I think that feels like the most poignant one.
Yeah, like a really pivotal moment then.
Yes.
So I know you mentioned before about, like, obviously the lockdown and your late 20s and stuff like that. Do you think, like, in your late 20s there was a lot of pressure on you from society in general to be doing certain things? Or do you feel like it's just pressure that you kind of put on yourself? Or
it's a great question. I think a mix of both. I think I probably felt that pressure from quite an early age, from no one in particular, just from a mix of, I had a great experience at school. I went to school where you could there was great sort of supportive learning environment. There was loads of extracurricular stuff, and I really got into all of that. I was playing sport and doing other things, so I really did dove into that and enjoyed that. But I think after that, it was kind of, what university you're going to, and it's, really lucky to have people asking those questions about what do you want to be, how can we support you to get there. But it was sort of a lot of focus on that and what I'm supposed to be. And I think I had maybe a disconnection from quite a young age about what I wanted. And I think a lot of us are conditioned probably to maybe lose that connection. A lot of people have it really strongly and they move through the world doing exactly what they want, and they often look individual or creative, and they can buck trends. And I always found that so overwhelmingly intimidating, because I probably was, and this isn't from a place of regret, this is from a place of just looking back and learning that was all part of my journey, but really understanding that I was so externally focused. I didn't have that connection to my internal compass at all. I was like, where am I supposed to be? And to speak of some of the things you probably thought of, in your late 20s, are you supposed to be achieving this work-wise, or at this certain level, or earning a certain amount, or, in your personal life, achieving these certain goals, or your life's looking this kind of way. And so there probably was a presence of that. I have never been particularly attached to like a certain salary or role myself, but I definitely felt the presence of, are you supposed to be things, or this is a good thing, right? Because I've been promoted. So that's a good thing. So I shouldn't not want it. I think unlearning so much of that, and it's been a long old journey, but I think and really focusing on what energy you want to work from.
Yeah. I think it's about like finding something that almost sparks that joy, and you kind of, because you spend so much time in a job, and it's like the type of thing where if you're getting up every day and you're not enjoying it, you're spending so much time in it, you're going to be like miserable. So if you're not doing something that you enjoy, and I think as a society, there's a lot of pressure for people in the late 20s and early 30s to be at a certain like stage of their life. Like you see sometimes your friends like married and like, you know, having babies and things like that, and you think, like, I know personally sometimes I can like look at that and think, oh, why am I not there? But then I also think, I'm my own person, this is my own life, I'm on my own timeline, it doesn't matter. Like, if that's not something I want, or if that's not something that like I never have, okay, cool. If it is something I want, okay, cool. But it's like one of them things where I think there is too much pressure on like people in the 20s and early 30s, and I think it's sometimes like trying to slow that down and like look within yourself and think to yourself, well, do you know what, if I'm not waking up every day being happy because I'm doing a job that I don't like, that's on me. That's not because I've like listened to society, whatever. It's not society's pressure, it's my choice and my pressure that I'm putting on myself. So I think it's important to listen to that own inner guidance and that own inner sort of intuition on what you're doing. And it's really inspiring to hear that you did do that, and you had that moment in your life where you thought, do you know what, like, I'm gonna do this. And it's brave as well. It's really brave.
I love what you said there, that intuition piece. That's so important. Like, yeah, I think we spend a lot of time in our heads, and, you know, we have to rationalize everything. Thinking is a wonderful tool, right? The rational brain is a wonderful tool, but we are quite disconnected from the rest of our body. You know, our brain is a big processing machine. It's incredible. It's like a supercomputer, but it's not designed to make us happy. It's designed to keep us safe and surviving. So it's constantly predicting and looking for threats. We've got, you know, a great brain that can do wonderful things, but the rest of our body is also part of our mind. That's the way I see it, like the way that we make decisions, the way that we feel, the way that we know, whatever that knowing is, and knowing what's right for us. And it comes from, you know, our nervous system runs throughout our whole body. You know, 90 or 70% of our neurotransmitters are made in our gut, 70 or 90. But like the brain isn't the only important thing. It's an incredible machine, but it's not the only important thing. And I think the intuition thing for me is in my body as well. And I definitely had, you know, those moments when I left my job, you know, when I handed my notice in, I'd been away and I came back and I just knew. I didn't draw any like pros and cons. It had been brewing for a while. I knew it had. And I went in on a Monday and I'd had a conversation. And that evening, I felt so powerful. I felt very energized and very aligned. And I went for this run around the park. And I hadn't been I'd been running normally, but I hadn't been on some sort of running training thing. I ran so far. I was weightless. And I ran so far. I remember feeling, and I was like, this, because I felt aligned, and I knew my body was like, you've made the right decision. You're moving forward. And to speak to your point about society and pressure, that's so there. And, you know, I can only speak to it from a female point of view. And it feels, particularly, there's certain elements that are, and I'm sure, you know, men will feel it in different ways and some of the similar ways. But I really, really, you know, felt that, you know, certainly in my later 20s, you know, I turned 30 as like, I think 2 weeks before I had that big burnout in 2020. And then we went to this lockdown. I was like, oh, my 30s were going to be fun. And, you know, now I'm about to turn 35, which feels a bit strange because in my head, I'm like, oh, I've just come into my 30s. And this is bringing around a whole new wave of stuff personally as well. You know, I'm like about to be 35. And if I have a child, then I'll be a geriatric mother. That's what medical science will.
We also have that body clock pressure as well.
Yeah,
so it's like, that's extra.
And your journey with that is you're always like, I know we're always right where we're meant to be. And I can feel dissonance between where I am and what I'd like, but I know I'm right where I'm meant to be, and because I am where I am.
Exactly. So, like, in terms of like what you were talking about, the intuition and the mind and body connection, the gut health, is there anything that from a gut health perspective that you can advise that would help with that? So, because I struggle a little bit between knowing intuition and knowing kind of what, sometimes I get a little bit of like anxiety. So sometimes I feel I struggle to differentiate between the two, because sometimes I'm like, yeah, this is going to happen and I need to lean into it. Or sometimes I'm like, oh, this is going to happen, like I'm scared type thing. So it's like, sometimes it's hard for me to understand the difference between an intuition, like a feeling that I can see something that's going to happen that's going to be good, or kind of that fear of like, this is just anxiety, I'm scared of something in the future. So like understanding, I know obviously anxiety is there for a reason, but is there a way that you can advise to kind of know the difference between those two things, because they feel very similar in the body?
Yeah, they really can. Like, I love that question of bringing, you know, there's loads about gut health at the moment. Like, we've done so much research as a society in the last 5-10 years, especially the last 5 years. So from a sort of microbiome and nutrition point of view, there's a huge wealth of stuff there. But when I look at any aspect of health or well-being, it's holistic, and that's been a massive part of my journey. It's not just about making a green smoothie and running. Green smoothies are amazing, spinach is incredible, running is great, all of that stuff. But I often found myself in this place of like, well, I should be doing this or I should be doing that. And, you know, if I'm not, then I'm sort of slacking off. And it's just, our health isn't just the absence of disease. It's a whole state of mental, physical, emotional, social, spiritual, whatever that means to you, connection to yourself, faith, nature, whatever it is. It's all of those things, and I think they've all, you know, got to be in balance. And they're so unique to all of us, you know, and they'll be unique at different times of your life. At certain times of your life, weightlifting and running might be your thing, or on any given day. But also on another day, you know, it might be that yoga or a different type of movement or a walk is your thing, and that's just, you know, one part of it. When it comes to kind of, you know, I mean, we use the word gut, and we can look at it physiologically, like your intestines. But we use it colloquially. We use it differently. We say like a gut feeling, and that we say that for a reason. And the difference that you highlighted between the two, that's so personal to all of us. And my advice, or certainly I can speak from my experience, the way that I've cultivated that is being present with myself. And that sounds really like cliched but it's very difficult to be present in the world that we live in, not just because we're sort of often mentally dragged back to the past or worrying about the future, but because there's so much distraction. Like, I have a phone, and it's a wonderful tool. I don't want to live without my phone, but it's also distracting me all of the time from connecting to myself. And I think I love journaling. A lot of stuff comes out when I journal, and journal prompts I find are really useful. I think sometimes just journaling and free flowing can be great, but oftentimes I cannot get to the nub of something. And I find journal prompts, and they're everywhere. Like, coaches share them, they're all over the internet. You can find specific journal prompts for specific things. But I find that self-inquiry, and some people don't like the writing aspect. Sometimes I quite like leaving myself voice notes, like on my phone. I speak as if I'm like not connecting to writing, but I ask myself questions. And I'm better at asking myself questions now. I've qualified as a coach, and I know what a great question is. Sometimes harder to do to yourself, but I do. I coach myself. I ask myself questions, and I pay attention to it. It's subtle, but you can pay attention to whether there's fear of something because you're thinking about what might happen if I'm not good enough or perfect. And that's usually an external expectation that you're creating to protect yourself from doing something that you want to do. Whereas if there's anxiety or a sort of moving away from something and a pushing, it's not aligned. Right. You know, whether it's a person or a thing, it doesn't need to be that person is like toxic or a narcissist, or lots of these words are being thrown around now. They might be, but it's paying attention to someone could be absolutely fine, and a situation could be fine for me, but you walk into a room for some reason, you're like, yeah, there's something not quite right. I'm not feeling settled. And it might not be that there's an external trigger. It might just be that where you're at. And often it's just knowing what feels safe. And if we're moving from a place of safety, you know, and it's that sort of like, am I creating a bit of a barrier to keep myself safe from something that I know I want to do? And it's, you know, there's a bit of perfectionism, or I'm procrastinating, or I'm, you know, versus that's not aligned because I don't believe that's right for me. And it's really subtle, but, you know, I find voice noting and talking it through, and also journaling, and yeah, just like being still, whatever that means to you, whether it means listening to music, meditating, breathing, whatever. It can mean a million different things, and it doesn't have to be overly technical. You don't have to like sit down for 20 minutes, but just paying attention to and inquiring.
I guess that it's almost all leading to like trusting yourself more.
Yes.
So the more present that you feel, and the more you can kind of sit in that, like sit in your feelings a little bit and notice them, then you kind of almost trust yourself more because you're feeling more. So then you can kind of go at things in a bit more of a clearer headspace, I think.
Yeah.
I find like sometimes when I like meditate and when I journal more, I like look at the world differently. I like don't get as I wouldn't say emotional, but I don't get as like triggered by little things because my head feels just clearer because I feel like I'm more in the moment. In terms of like trusting yourself, like I know you've mentioned things with like the journaling and the meditation and feeling more present and how that helps you sort of know the difference between your intuition and then sometimes other stuff that might just kind of being anxious about for whatever reason. Is there anything that you feel like you did in that sort of pivotal moment in the lockdown and the late 20s and the early 30s that you feel like allowed you to trust yourself more outside of the coaching stuff? I know it kind of ties in together, but in terms of like your personal life, which allowed you to go, do you know what? I've done this now. I trust myself and I'm going to...
You know what? I think the main thing that comes up with the theme for me has been I used to be very focused on doing. Either to prove myself or to live up to expectations, people pleasing, and that's personally, professionally, so disconnected from what I would want to do or what I would like, whether that's a film I wanted to watch or where do you want to eat? Don't mind, whatever you want to do. Sometimes it's okay to be like, I literally don't care. But as the default response of being like, well, what does everyone else want? Just shape-shifting and moulding. And I was an expert at it. I was very, very good. And I didn't look like, a shy people pleaser. I was confident, articulate, but you become very, very attuned, especially professionally, at just moulding to what anyone wanted me. And really that was about being safe. It was about being safe or validated. So I will be whatever needs me to be in this room. If I need to be confident, if I need to be not so, or if I need to be doing this or that, or what role will you want me to do that role? Okay, I'll do it. And I think I'm abandoning myself in that. And it's not about going and criticizing myself for that. It's all part of my journey. But it's noticing now how disconnected I was from myself. My cultivation of self-trust was around, and I suppose my experience during all of that, I always felt like I should be doing more. And that sense of a dissatisfaction, a disconnection from myself that created a bit of a void, a bit of a dissatisfaction, a bit of a like, well, I'm doing all the right things. Maybe I should be like eating better, or maybe I should be like running more, or my social life should look like this. Lots of shoulds in there. And I wasn't creating from within. I was kind of building something of external expectations and doing stuff that I thought other people were doing or I should do that might make me happy or more satisfied. And I'm abandoning myself. So I didn't trust myself at all. And there's a real disconnection. And to start to create that connection, I had to just be. And by that, I mean slow down and honor the feelings I had of just wanting to stop instead of shaming myself. Like that self-compassion piece, if you are in a state of disconnection, and that can look a million different ways, if you are living for an external expectation or for someone else or chasing things, or maybe this, looking for that next thing, slowing down and stopping is a radical act in the society we live in. And I don't mean like sleeping. Sleeping's great, but just existing in a room, even if that means staring at a wall, it might mean that what you need in that moment is just to binge watch something. And even that word, there's binge watch. It's just so. I'm not saying just disconnect and go into a screen, because sometimes that is disconnecting, but just being. I would shame myself so much for wanting to just not do much, and that's so part of what we didn't exist and evolve on this world to like do goals. We're just humans trying to survive, and just being is part of what we're supposed to do. Just like sitting in a park and looking at the sky. And I know that might sound really woo-woo, but I shamed myself so much for that. So learning to trust myself by slowing down was really hard. I battled with for so many years, and I still do occasionally battle with it. But when I slowed down, I could pay attention to what was going on for me, and I could build a relationship with myself and start to learn that doing from a place of alignment and energy that made me feel positive and who I was, you start to like develop that muscle, develop that connection. And then you can let go a bit of like, I don't want to go for a run today, so I'm not going to.
Yeah.
Rather than, oh, but then you're lazy. Like, no, I'm not going to go for a run.
Yeah. It's trusting like your body as well with that.
Yes.
So going, you know what? Yeah, because I do this with the gym all the time. If I get up and I go, right, I'm going to go, and then I'm like, oh, I'm naked. I don't want to go. And then I hate myself for it. I'm not me. But when I started to actually think to myself, well, do you know what? Maybe my body just needs rest. And then it's that, what you just mentioned there about the word lazy used to be something that I pride myself on not being.
Yeah.
So when I used to just like slow down, I'd be like, oh, but I'm being lazy. But I wasn't. I was actually just looking after me, my mental health, my body. Like I'm just slowing down because I constantly felt like I needed to be on the move because I didn't want to be associated with the word lazy.
Yeah.
And that's just something that, because it's one of them things where you kind of, sometimes you have these like self-limiting beliefs about yourself. And that's the one thing that I believed about myself, that I wasn't lazy. So if I was doing anything that was perceived to be lazy, I'd feel guilty. In terms of like self-limiting beliefs and stuff like that, is there anything that you would recommend for people to really help sort of connect with themselves so they're not identifying with those belief systems which are obviously negative? So for example, I don't know whether like you recommend like affirmations and things like that, which I think sometimes I used to do them and I'd say I am amazing, but then I wouldn't necessarily believe it. But then it's also a case of fake it till you make it, and then eventually your brain, like, there's another thing called like laughing therapy or smiling therapy, where you just laugh and it doesn't sound funny, but then you start laughing because you're laughing, and it's kind of like, So the question I have is, what would you recommend to people so they, I know you mentioned about connecting with yourself, but off the back of that, if those, self-limiting beliefs do come up, what would you advise people to do to kind of, because I know sometimes people advise, just be positive, but then there's also the other side of, sometimes if you try and be positive all the time, it almost leads towards toxic positivity, which is a negative thing. And so what did you find kind of worked for you, and what would you advise to people to do if those kind of belief systems are negatively affecting them?
I think the first thing to do is really understand what your limiting beliefs are. They can be quite sneaky, and there's usually they might come up in one area of your life. It might be professionally, it might be dating, it might be personally, it might be socially, it might be something to do with moving your body or exercising, or it could be they're coming up all over the place. But and there'll be things that you can find online. You can email me and I'll send you some journal prompts, and you don't have to write journal. You can just think or inquire or voice note yourself, or talk it out with someone that you trust who will ask you the questions, and get to the root of them. So what am I thinking in this situation? What's going on? What am I feeling in my body? What are the thoughts? What are the actual thoughts that are going through my mind? What are the emotions that I'm feeling attached to those thoughts? So the thought is, oh my gosh, I'm going to this social event and no one likes me. Everyone's laughing at me, or they're talking about me behind my back. But those feelings, and the emotion, what is the feeling that brings up in my body, or the emotion? Embarrassment, shame, whatever it is, fear. And what does that do in my body? What does it do? It makes me feel uneasy and unsafe. And then I might, when I'm feeling uneasy and unsafe, I'm not acting from a place of safety. Psychological, physical safety. Our nervous system is activated because we're thinking threat, 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 as much as they might be. It's not the old-fashioned threat that our brain used to think about, but it's, and then what we do is we act in a way that doesn't feel like aligned to us, whether that's subtle, or whether it's, you think, oh, I fumbled over my words, or I didn't do this, or I didn't talk, because we're staying small, because we're fearful. So I think getting to the root of those through journaling, inquiry, through safe conversations, through voice noting, just reflecting, whatever that practice looks like for you, getting to the root of that is. And they often are one thing, right? It's often, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough is a very common one for people, and it kind of boils it down. And then it's kind of looking into, that'll be the first stage of getting to the nub, and there might be one or two, there might just be one, and getting to understand, where has that come from? Because that's conditioning. Like, we're not born thinking we're not good enough. We're born being like, oh, I'm just here. Here's some mud, I'm going to throw it at a wall. Here's some food. I don't want that food now. Now I want it again. We do what the F we want when we're born. We're conditioned. And it's comparing ourselves is incredibly, incredibly difficult. I also think, inquiring as to where that came from. the next thing really is compassion. You talked about positive and negative thinking. It's not, of course it is that binary. We have a set of experiences, call them emotions, call them feelings. When we say feeling, like I can feel my body. Feelings are physical sensations that our brain interprets as an emotion. And we can have different associations with that. That's all quite learned and conditioned. Understanding without judgment or without a need to fix, just understanding our experience. And possibly not trying to have such a negative association with what we class as negative emotions. We're meant to have a full range of emotions. And we avoid negative feelings like the plague. And we have so many ways to avoid them now. We have TikTok, we have podcasts. Podcasts are great. We're speaking on one right now. But sometimes when I find myself not wanting to meet myself, and that sounds woo-woo, what I mean is I avoid my journal. That's me spending time with myself. I avoid slowing down and stopping. I find I'm like listening to podcasts more and more and more. There's always music on, there's always noise on, I'm always doing. It's distraction. And when I don't have that practice, even if it's 10 minutes a day, when I say practice, it doesn't mean you're practicing the piano to get better or you're practicing anything. It just means a ritual. It doesn't have to be like a habit. It's just a ritual of connecting and slowing down. I can sit with those negative, in quotes, negative emotions. I'm meant to have a full range of experiences and creating a safe space to go, I feel sad. I feel unsettled. I feel and just be like, that's okay, and not have to try and change it. If we try and resist those things and avoid them, they don't go away. They stay there being like, it's going to keep tapping and it's going to, come into your body and your mind and manifest in other ways. I think affirmations are incredible when they are connected from that root. So when we've done the inquiry to understand what those limiting beliefs are, what those things are, what the nub of it is, and we kind of can start to create a picture about where it came from, not pathologizing, but sort of understanding the story that we tell ourselves, because we're all telling ourselves stories. I have a set of experiences and I tell myself a story about who I am in the world. And some of that's real, some of that's constructed by my brain. It doesn't really matter, but that will help me and it will limit me. So it's probably great that you're like, I'm not a lazy person. Whereas if you had a voice in your head all the time going, I'm a lazy person, I'm a lazy person. But equally, every strength has an edge, right? And it's that thing of not being able to slow down. Once we've kind of done that inquiry, creating affirmations that you either write or say that are meaningful and connected. I think sometimes there's so much noise out there about, whether it's manifesting or affirmations and we can sort of go about saying them, but they're someone else's maybe, and they're not connected to ours. And the connection is the main thing, I think.
Yeah, I think I like that because then it's like more of a personal affirmation, right? And I think I sometimes find this with like meditation and stuff where if I'm not connected to the voice, and the voice of the person is kind of just not aligned. I know it sounds weird, but it's like sometimes some voices just I don't take in what they're saying sometimes, or like the voice slightly annoys me or something. I don't know. Like sometimes certain meditations, I'm like, don't connect with it. And I love that what you've just said about like writing your own, and then sitting with that. My life coach taught me to go through the alphabet as well. She said if you go through like I am A, amazing, I am B, and actually thinking of affirmations which kind of really resonate with me, really helps me sort of believe them more and sort of associate with them, and then it does help me. Yeah, it's really interesting that, because I feel like sometimes you live in your head in terms of what other people are thinking of you, whereas sometimes if you go, actually no, like it doesn't matter. They're not actually thinking about you as much as what you think they are, because they're living in their own head thinking what they're thinking of me, just like the way that kind of we're doing that. So I think it's like about sometimes tuning that out and then tuning back into ourselves and going, right, wait, what do I think of them? why am I worried about what they think of me? And I think, having that sort of practice within yourself, where you tuned in within yourself, and you can start to listen to more of what you need. How do you feel like you've kind of allowed yourself to keep that connection with yourself consistent? So I know you've mentioned about sort of like having that ritual and that, making sure that you're taking that time. How do you, is there anything that you do which allows you to sort of hold yourself accountable, I suppose, to make sure that you are, sticking to that and being consistent? Because I know you said not necessarily a habit, but I think if that's something that you know helps, and that's an amazing piece of advice to give people to connect with themselves, how do you hold yourself accountable to make sure that you do that when you're supposed to do that?
Yeah, it's a really good kind of topic to discuss, and I feel like I feel in this space that I'm now in as a coach, this and what the world is often so focused on at the moment, this real tug of war between consistency and self-accountability. And accountability allows us to trust ourselves. When we do what we say we're going to do, we trust ourselves more. But also holding space for going, I'm not a robot, right? I'm inconsistent in my energy levels and my mood, and that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me. We're obsessed with like consistency, but especially as a woman, I don't have a consistent physiology over the course of a month, but also over the course of my life. Like, I'm not consistently how I was when I was 21, and if I embark on a journey as a mother, my life is going to be very different, right? And we're not consistent again, luckily we're all talking about perimenopause and menopause and postmenopausal experiences as women. That's just one thing, right? But our hormones and our physiology govern us loads. So I'm not a robot. What I tend to do is I always imagine that I'm holding those two things with me. And the two things are, whether you call it accountability, discipline, that's a big word at the moment. We're obsessed with productivity and discipline. That is so important. Yeah. But I also hold compassion there. And I hold those two in balance. And I tend to, I'll come in peaks and troughs. I've connected more with what works for me. I try not to what I call shop around for those rituals and habits. I try to build them myself and also not hold them so rigidly that they can't change. If I'm dropping off from, whether it's the morning routine I have, that having worked for myself for 2.5 years, my day now starts with space, right? I obviously might have meetings that I've got, places to be, but I've chosen them, I've designed that, I've curated that. My day starts. For me, that's it's a lucky thing, it's a privilege, but I've made choices and there are downsides to working for yourself. But my day starts for me. I wake up and there is nothing pulling on me, or I try to have that mindset and that boundary that there is just space for me to exist. And that's moving my body, whatever. But I'm not a robot. I don't do it every day. And sometimes I need sleep, and I let that be true. But I hold those two things, and I try to, like earlier when we were talking about whether it's that fear from anxiety, whether it's not aligned, or whether it's just like, oh, am I avoiding something because there's a bit of perfectionism, procrastination I know I want to do, and I'm creating that, self-sabotaging thing to keep myself, in quotes, safe. It's those two things. I try to hold, I want to have accountability, and I do, and I am much better at holding myself accountable now. But at the same time, if you're going to build discipline in your life and you're going to hold yourself accountable, bring the same equal measure, your two back pockets, self-discipline, accountability, those sort of doing words that are pushing ourselves to achieve our goals. In your other pocket, you've got a massive dose of self-compassion. So that when you don't, you have two choices. You beat yourself up and you shame yourself. And over the course of the day or the week or the month, imagine being in a room where someone's going, well, you're rubbish, you're lazy. In that room, that metaphorical room, it's a pretty dire environment to move from. So you're not going to feel, your nervous system doesn't feel safe, you don't feel good. So you're not going to go about doing anything and reconnect with what you want to do, which is journal, run, meditate, whatever it is you want to do, your work, creating. So you need to hold that huge dose of self-compassion and love in the other pocket in equal measure, so that when you don't meet something, you go, right, take a massive, spoonful of sugar, Mary Poppins, take a massive dose of that, give yourself the love and care that you need, that you would give a friend, and you give everyone else, and then move on and reset. The more you hold on to the shame and self-criticism, the least likely you are to pick up and move again, whatever that is, whether that's doing, creating. And it's setting realistic ones as well. I think, I'm guilty of this sometimes. I find a great rhythm, and then I put these things in my calendar where it's like a recurring event every day, evermore. I'm like, well, that's not realistic. Stop doing it. And I don't as much now, but I used to be like, I'm going to run every single day. Why? Yeah. I'm going to go to the gym every single day. Yeah. And also just then allowing myself to be like, God, in the spring this year, I was going to like 5 spinning classes a week. I was loving it. I couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah.
And then that sort of stopped for various reasons. And it's not because I'm a lazy person. It's just because life and just allowing myself to be a bit more fluid.
Yeah,
and everyone's different.
Like cutting yourself a bit of slack, isn't it? It's like saying to them, do you know what? If I don't do it today, it's fine because I'm going to come back the other day 10 times stronger or in a better place to actually do it and smash what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And it's just giving yourself that that compassion. And it's so easy not to do that sometimes, especially when you're not doing something which you've set your mind to do.
Yeah.
Like I think that what you mentioned there about not putting the standards too high, so not having the goals too high, because we've all been guilty of it sometimes. On like a Sunday night, you go, right, I'm going to do this on Monday, I'm going to do it, or I'm going to do this throughout the week, or I'm going to like put yourself your goals too high about doing something, and then it comes to it and you go, that's overwhelming.
Yeah.
And it puts you off it, and you even like procrastinate. Whereas if you just said, you know what, I'm going to do this one thing on Monday, smash that, or I might even just put myself a goal to do that next week. Yeah. And just have those kind of goals which are like easier to, and then you end up actually going to it. For example, say you're going to like reorganise a drawer that's a messy drawer or something. You end up going to it and you think to yourself, do you know what, I've done this drawer now, I might actually do another drawer.
Yes.
And you feel more motivated. Whereas if you said I'm going to do a whole room, you're not going to do it. So I think setting yourself those kind of little goals are really important, and rather than the big ones. Is there anything that you do in terms of like your goal setting that kind of helps you achieve them better, and also just helps you achieve them in general rather than putting them too high and then not necessarily
I take quite a different approach to this now, and I've kind of built it, it's over the last how many years. I've gone through phases of really hating I'm not a New Year's resolution person at all. I tend to align myself much more seasonally now, actually, because in the depths of winter, 1st of January is 9 days after the winter solstice, and like it's the shortest day, not longest, shortest day, longest night. Like I am an animal. Like I know I'm a really sophisticated one that walks around with like a computer and like gets on a red bus and moves around London, but like I'm just an animal. And it's funny when I've started very, very subtly started to sort of think, well, actually, no, I'm going to, in autumn, I start to sort of get more reflective about the year. I start to reflect, and I start to, in November, really start to think ahead to next year. I'm not thinking like, what am I shedding from this year? Like the leaves are shedding. Doesn't have to be that woo, doesn't have to work for you if that doesn't, but like it kind of is what's happening, whether you like it or not. You need more sleep in winter. I need more sleep in winter. I have less energy. Like
we're getting less sunlight.
So. Yes, all of the food that you eat, whether it's from an animal or whether it's from a plant, the energy has all come from the sun. Photosynthesis turns into energy. Whole science behind that. But we are solar powered, so there's less bioavailable energy in the winter. It's science. But equally, there is something intuitive about aligning to nature. So aside from the timing of that, I tend to just work through the year, whether it's quarterly or not. Like I have check-in points. And I sort of, when I think about the next year, I'm thinking about, when I'd say February is when I activate and gear up again. And my restorative time is December and January, because that's when I'm inward restoring, reflecting. And when we stop, that's fertile ground for really interesting reflections, insights, for other things to grow. I think when it comes to goal setting, I really start with like what I've learned from the previous period of time, whether that's a year, whatever it is, what I'm shedding and letting go of. And that doesn't mean like a bad habit I want to let go of. It's something that I notice is shifting, something I'd like to shed, something I know I'm letting go of, whether that's a limiting belief, whether that's a behavior or a coping mechanism. And I start with intentions. I start with, and this is much more free flowing, I start with like the shape of the year, the energy I want to move from. How do I want to spend my time? I think when we think about our careers when we're young, someone's asking what you want to be, a job title, a role, or a sector or an industry. But even if you take any industry, you could do a million different tasks that contribute towards that energy, industry, not energy. You could be in the pharmaceutical industry, but you could be a social media creator or a scientist, and their days will look very different. You could be in the well-being industry, and you can be like a PT doing an army-inspired boot camp, or you can be like an energy worker doing Reiki. Like it's very, very different. And I think it's really important to think about what do I want to be doing every day? Like, what am I called to do? Where does my energy sit? Do I like... So that's a broader question. I think thinking about my year, I tend to do that. When it comes to making those objectives, so like starting with intentions and then working down, if I set myself goals or targets or whatever works for you, I tend to be outcome focused. I'm thinking about an outcome. I'm thinking about what I'd like to achieve or what I'd like to have happen. And then I think about the conditions that are going to create that or make that possible.
Okay.
So if I want to, I don't know, if I'd like to run a marathon, and that's a really obvious one, and it's kind of quite a doing one, or if I'd like to have X money earned from my business in that time. These are I'm making them quite like tangible, smart objectives. Make them smart if that is important. And I then think about what are the conditions that make that possible. So for me, as a holistic coach, I will always look at mentally, physically, socially, emotionally, spiritually. Like those are the 5 pillars that I think of. What needs to be true for me to be able to achieve that? And I think about all of it rather than just going, so I need to run 3 times a week and have this nutrition plan. And that's really, really useful to have, whether you're using an app, whether you're using something else. But I think about what needs to be true for me. I need a supporting environment. I need, maybe I need some social connection to make it happen. I need to feel engaged as to why I'm doing this. Like, why do I want this? If I'm running a marathon because I want to prove something to the world, or just say that I'm someone who's want to run a marathon, that might be fine for some people. But what's my actual reason? It's so that I can prove something to myself. It's so that I feel good at the end of it. Getting your why clear is really important. I also think when people set smart objectives, and we're obsessed with goals and objectives now, having a smart objective is really important. But also create a plan for what's going to get in your way. Like you were saying earlier, it's overwhelming when we've got this like really rigid plan. And have your back pocket scenario for what happens when I don't want to do this. Like you can't, like there's so much about this at the moment as well. You can't just rely on motivation because that goes up and down. Yes, there's self-discipline, but also what happens when I don't want to do it? Do I have my, diet version of the day? Have that pre-planned so you can just grab your diet version of the day, which is like, I put on my shoes and I go for a 10-minute run and that is it. And then you've done what you need to do. If you only have the full fat plan, then you're like, I don't have that mentally, physically, emotionally. I'm not there today because life has happened. I've had a really difficult day at work, or I've just lost my job, or my car's broken down, or my child is sick, or I've had a really uncomfortable conversation with my boss or my partner. That will happen. And there needs to be flex. So have the diet version of your day or your plan or whatever you're going to do, but also have a support structure. Have someone that you can call upon to support you. Build all of that in at the outset rather than just building out this plan. Know that things are going to come up and change what's going to happen, and have your default things to call upon. Have your supplement ready. Have your off-the-shelf diet version of your day to call upon so that you can do that.
Yeah, I think it then goes back to what you were saying before about it. If you have that diet version, then you're going to give yourself a little bit more self-compassion because you've fallen off, but you're not falling off fully.
Yeah.
So then you go, oh, okay, I'm actually okay because I've got this backup.
And if you don't have that backup, or have a medium or a light, if you don't have that backup, and I don't, these, you can come up with all sorts of scenarios for this, the only option is to fall off the wagon or do the really overwhelming thing. So have somewhere in the middle.
So in terms of, I guess, connecting to yourself and like cultivating that self-care in everyday life, have you got any advice for our listeners on things that they can do or things that you do that kind of bring you comfort?
Yeah, I think then that's been a whole journey in the last however many years, certainly 5 years. I think for me, my morning routine is really important, and that's not a revelatory thing. Morning routine is well established, but I think don't trust your mood until you've moved. Like,
love that.
Yeah, that's not mine. But there's something in that as well, and it doesn't have to be like intensive exercise. And that's been part of my journey of just going, I roll the mat out. And even if I just sit on the mat with my body, being a body, and that might be child's pose, it might be a downward dog, it might be like random stretches after I've woken up that feels just 10 minutes. And the practice isn't an outcome of achieving, it's being. we're so focused on the outcome of like, I do this workout or I do that workout. I often end up doing a half an hour workout, whether that's a bit of yoga or Pilates or, some movement, a little like functional strength workout. But that's not always the aim. The aim as a minimum is to be a body on my mat. Is what I say to myself.
Yeah. So that's how you start, basically.
Yeah. I start my day like that. I wake up, I always make my bed, very, very minor thing, but that has I always make my bed. And yeah, I move on my mat. And sometimes that's for 5 or 10 minutes. And sometimes I'm feeling heavy. And I go, oh, I'm feeling heavy. I notice that. And that's all I do with it. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, I just go like do something. And I get like an app out, find one of my workouts, and I'm there and it's great. But I just always feel different and uplifted and better and more aligned. Even if that alignment is, I'm feeling heavy today. At least then I'm aware of what's going on rather than just completely disconnected. And it springs up in other ways throughout my day. Another game-changing thing for me has been breath work. And I've, probably in the last 2 years, kind of journeyed into that really. And I just find a lot of the stuff that even I've been saying today, connect yourself, be more present, be with yourself. If you're at a stage of trying to find out what that means for you, and it looks different for everyone, it can be quite hard when someone, I remember listening to these sorts of things before and being like, connect yourself. And I'd be like, how? Like journal, I'd sit there and be like, I am writing a journal. Today I did this. Like, it's not a like diary. I'm not writing like, what I did today was this. But sometimes I do write that and I'm like, oh, whatever. But it's really hard to know. But I think connecting to your body, whether that's through movement, and breath work for me was a way of just stilling my mind. And whether you're doing something a bit more activating, that I do something called Soma breath, SOMA. I also do like conscious connected breathing. They are quite intense, like activated breathing practices. And I do them through, practitioners. I'll join an online class. Sometimes I do it on my own. But that has been like just amazing for me. You are regulating your nervous system. You are going into a parasympathetic state. But you're just, at the end of it, I've always struggled to kind of sit and meditate. And I say struggle, I think the point of meditation is, in quotes, the struggle. It's okay to have thoughts. You're not meant to be Buddha. Just notice them and then notice them again. But it can be quite difficult. After doing breath work, I've connected completely to my body. I'm using my body to relax my mind and my brain. And my brain I can sit there in a really busy environment, really noisy environment, where before, 30 minutes prior, I would have been like, oh my God, that noise. Oh, shut up. Oh, what's that distraction? Oh, my neighbour.
That's me.
Yeah. But it's bizarre. Yeah. I can sit there and I'm like, I am Buddha. And that's, I'm obviously not. And I know I'm not Buddhist. I'm not everything. And I mean that with all respect. I'm not appropriating any cultures, but I just feel completely in my body. I've stopped living in my head and I'm in all of me, and I can just be completely calm. That has been quite game-changing for me.
That sounds very similar to meditation. Is breath work and meditation do they work together, or are they both separate? Can you do breath work without meditation?
Of course. I mean, all of these things are from, Eastern cultures that we in the West are borrowing, sometimes with great respect and sometimes, not. I think it's, there's loads, you can go for a walk and meditate. But if you're plugging in your music or listen to a podcast, possibly not. Meditation means different things to everyone. Mindfulness, mindfulness meditation or meditation. Some people chant when they meditate. Some people do transcendental meditation. They're given a word that they say. Yoga and meditation, connecting to the breath. Yoga doesn't exist without the breath. And a lot of the ways in which we come to connect to these things, especially yoga, has been this sort of, how can you do the headstand and contort your body? That's not what yoga in its essence is. It's just being in our body without trying to achieve anything. And meditation will mean different things to different people. For me, breath work allows me to just be in what you might call a meditative state. And what I find is just being. I'm not trying to achieve anything. And I'm just completely, in my body. And that's been something that I wouldn't have been able to describe what in my body felt like 5 years ago.
What type of breath work would you recommend then? Because, obviously, I've heard of it and I kind of know what it is, but I wouldn't know where to start. Is it something that you kind of, I know, what is it, Soma?
Yes, that's a type of breath. So the breath work, there's all sorts of different types. You can do they call it psychological sigh. You take a deep breath in, and then when you're at the top, you take another breath in, and then you breathe out. That's sort of called a psychological sigh. There's box breathing. I think so. When you think about it it's all just from a scientific point of view. What that is doing is you're breathing in, and again, focusing on breathing into your belly, making visualize your diaphragm stretching down into your belly so that your lungs are filling up. The first thing that moves should be your belly, and then the last thing, if you really have to, would be your chest coming out. Like your shoulders are going up the first time you breathe. You're not breathing into the full capacity of your lungs. When you think about it scientifically, what you're doing is you're breathing into your belly, and then that extra sip of breath, I want you to imagine all the little, and I forget the name of them, all the little capillaries in your lungs where the air goes in. If you imagine that picture, they look like sort of, like the branches of a tree. That's filling with oxygen. And when you take that extra breath, you're really expanding fully into all of those ones that often stay, sort of stuck together. And so that in itself is like, it's cleansing, it's fulfilling, but it's also just getting more oxygen into your body, which awakens us. We run off of oxygen and glucose, basically, that makes ATP, which fuels our cells. But you're getting more oxygen to your body, it awakens you a bit. So that in its very basic form is one thing. Box breathing is another form of breathing.
Is that with the one where you kind of go...
You imagine a box, you're breathing in for 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever number it is, but it's the same, like a square on every side. You're breathing in, you're holding for the same amount of time, you're breathing out for the same amount of time, and then you're holding at the bottom. And again, that's quite a regulatory one. It's meant to sort of regulate you. And just, again, it's visualizing whatever works for you. The more intense breath works, and there are several different flavors, if you call it that. Holotropic breathing could be an umbrella term for it. It's much more activating. So you're usually sort of lying down, possibly sometimes sitting. I find those are better to do with a guided breath worker. And they'll come from lots of different sort of schools of breath work. Soma breath, the one that I have really got into this year. And I do it with someone, plug her now, called Georgie Bolan, who actually does, I do events at a certain co-working space that we're actually in at the moment. And she also does breath work there as well. But she runs a business called Solar Space, so SOULAR. And she does yoga, she does movement, she does retreats, but she does breath work. And that's the type of breath work that she did. And I remember the first time I did it, I was just like, wow. And it's much more, it's rhythmical breathing to music. So you're breathing in for 2 and out for 2, in the nose, out the mouth, or in the nose and out the nose. Sometimes people find it harder to breathe. But you're generally breathing in through your nose and out of your mouth for 4 or for 2, and it's to music, and it'll change throughout the course. But then you're doing breath holds at the bottom and at the top. And it's just, you're completely in your body. The music is a very important part of it as well, and you're being guided by someone. There's loads of stuff online. There'll be places near you. It's popping up. I think the main thing to focus on is find something that works for you.
I guess at the core of breath work is literally just taking a breath, right? It's I think sometimes obviously if we're in a panicky mode or overthinking or whatever, our breath might be quite shallow. But sometimes it's just important to just go.
So breath work can be exactly, it's working with the breath in its raw essence. It doesn't need to be what I just described. A more
advanced version of that.
Yeah, and it's a particular practice. It's got someone sort of guiding you. Breath work is just working with your breath, which we've sort of forgotten to do. And to speak about taking a breath and we live in a state of sort of sometimes chronic dysregulation of our nervous system. So, in quotes, fight or flight. I talk about, or I live through the nervous system a lot in my coaching. I talk about it. I love working with, the nervous system, but polyvagal theory, where, our vagus nerve, everyone's talking about the vagus nerve a lot. And, polyvagal theory is a theory that's been posited. We are still learning so much about our minds, our bodies, and understanding them. And not everyone is aligned on it, but the basis of it is there are 2 strands of your vagus nerve. And so when you come from a parasympathetic state, which is our rest, digest, relax, we can either move to be activated, and activated doesn't have to be negative. It doesn't have to be fight or flight in a bad way. Activated could be I'm moving, I'm doing, I'm creating. That positive sense of you're taking action from a place of safety. So I feel safe to go and dance in this space. That is an activation. it's positive. Going and having a positive physical and intimate experience with someone is activated from a place of safety. We're doing things, but equally, being activated from a place of dysregulation or a lack of safety is when we are triggered and we are fighting or flighting. And when we get completely overwhelmed, we go into freeze, which is a shutdown state, which is where we're no longer mobilized to do anything about the thing we're fearful of. We've just completely shut down and we're conserving and frozen. I think we think about those states often as short or temporary, but what we're in a state of now in our society, or the way we live our lives now, is unless you step out into the road and a bus comes past you, rarely someone is attacking you and you need to fight or flight. A lot of the time it's an email, it's a notification, it's a thought that's circling around our head that is creating these chronic states of fight, flight, or freeze. Freeze could be procrastination, a real sense of not being able to move or do anything, or feeling low energy, low activation. And we're in those states quite a lot. And to connect to our body through breath work, through movement, through inquiry into our mind and our physical state. But by being in the body, it can really help us reset that. We don't connect very much to it, but it's ruling our thoughts a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's interesting, like the breath side of stuff. I've never done breath work myself, but I started doing. I started it last year, but like more towards like summer this year, and then to started doing it now because it's freezing. But cold therapy.
Yes.
And I bought myself a little like inflatable plunge pool, and the first time I did it, I remember like just it took my breath away. I was like so cold, and then all of a sudden you go, I'm fine, I'm safe, and then you go, and it regulates you. You almost like self-regulate your breathing, and that kind of seemed quite similar in the terms of like if I'm a little bit panicky, my breath's like, but then like when I'm calmer, I'm like, yeah. And I guess like with breath work, is it kind of similar in terms of you're almost just regulating yourself?
Yeah, is that really similar experience. So I love, I can't say I do it tons. I do have one of those inflatable plunge baths, but I have a one-bed flat in London, so the only place I can put it is my balcony, and I haven't quite got the logistics because I don't have a hose. So it was a pipe dream for, I don't know.
Like a one by one with like a
I need to do that, yeah, I think. I'll get to it. I got it earlier this year and I haven't set it up. That's my, I haven't got the discipline there, but I haven't done that. But I go and do it in other places, whether that's, there's the Rest Reservoir in London, sometimes I go there. I was at a retreat.
Cold sponge pool?
It's a reservoir that you can go like wild swimming, you can go swimming. And it's mad. Yeah, or you could obviously go into other plunges in like, sauna, spa places popping up everywhere. The same feeling of that. You go into the cold water and you're right, under, and your shoulders are under, and everything in your body and your mind is screaming at you. This is a stupid thing to do. Why are you doing it? Get out. That is discomfort.
Yeah.
And we avoid discomfort like the plague because it's uncertain, it's unpredictable, and obviously physically our body is being like, bad idea, like we need to stay at a temperature to survive. But it's amazing how when you stay in that, you are using your mind, body, I don't really distinguish between the two, brain and the set of organs that creates a whole body that is also your mind, to teach yourself that it's okay. The hard thing happened, the discomfort was there, but your executive brain, the bit of the brain that we have that lots of animals don't have, that prefrontal cortex, your executive decision maker has decided to stay in because you know it's safe and you know at any moment you can leave. And you're in control and you're choosing this. That state that you get into that you talked about is really calm. Like after about maybe a minute being in cold water, do you get that like washing over you state of like
so obviously you go,
oh, it's fine. Yeah. Okay. And then suddenly you're sort of like, even when you wiggle your toes, like none of the water feels cold anymore. You're just in there, and I feel completely calm. Completely. It's a very similar feeling to how I'd feel after breath work. It's this reset. You're in your whole body. You don't have a choice but to feel the whole of your body. And it's completely calming, I feel. And my mind goes quite quiet, for the first minute, or however long it might be, 2 minutes, for some people it might be 10 seconds. There's a noisy mind being like, why have I done this? I hate this. What am I doing? What are you doing? I can't do this. I can't do this. Oh, everyone else does this better than me, potentially. Or like, I should be able to hold it for this amount of time. And then it just quietens. And that feeling is very similar. There'll be loads of different things we can do, whether it's cold therapy, breath work. Some people will find that in all sorts of different ways, but it's quietening the mind by engaging the body. You can use our mind to do stuff with our body, like when we're pushing ourselves mentally or when we're doing things all the time. My brain is saying, do this, do that. But we can also use our bodies as a tool to quieten our very, very noisy and sometimes unhelpful minds. And I think it's a two-way relationship. And I think that for me has been, really, really powerful.
Yeah, I think like what I kind of realised about myself through cold exposure therapy was the more I did it, the happier I felt in general, because it kind of, it's scientifically proven that it increases, I think it's your endorphin levels gradually throughout the whole day. So you feel good throughout the whole day.
Yeah.
Whereas sometimes you can feel good and then like drop off. But like with that, it's incredible. You feel alert as well. Your mind just feels so sharp. But the other side of it is like, because I'm exposing myself to a stressor, essentially, because I'm in this body of cold water, I'm stressed when I get in. When I calm myself down, it kind of almost logs that in my brain.
Yeah.
So like when I have another external stressful situation, say for example, someone comes over and raises the voice at me for whatever reason, or I'm a bit like, oh. When I was doing cold therapy, I remembered that feeling of, okay, I've been in a stressful situation before and I was fine and I was safe and I calmed myself down.
Yeah.
This is happening again. It's almost like it's that memory in my brain where I go, I'm okay. And I relate it back to any sort of stressor that happens. And that's why I think it's so powerful.
Oh, totally. Like, again, polyvagal theory, if we're talking within the lens of the nervous system, that would be called increasing your window of tolerance, which is your resilience level, your window of tolerance, the things that can happen that you, in quotes, tolerate by staying more or less in a parasympathetic or calm nervous system state that's regulated, where you can make decisions from a place of safety. You're not externally triggered and you don't tip over into that fight or flight mode or straight into a freeze mode. But by doing hard things, by sitting in discomfort and knowing that after a minute and a half of our brains telling us everything's bad, we're then like, oh, it's not.
It's fine.
And you come to exercise that muscle with the cold therapy, but there is a sense of autonomy in that, right? There is that control or autonomy that you can leave, and that practice is why it's so great. Obviously, not everything in our lives has that. There will be stresses that come in. But we're animals, right? If you think about a sort of, a dashboard from, green right over to red, we are in a state of chronic stress and dysregulation and burnout. That's a pandemic as well we've got at the moment. But I sometimes think we're not supposed to be in a state of zero stress. What we're actually meant to be in a state is of eustress, EU stress. We're animals. Stresses are positive. They keep us, they're external impetus and catalysts that keep us activated, mobilized, interested, inquiring, doing things, engaging with the world. Small stresses are good. Like stressors or external engagement is positive. It's when we're designed to handle moments of acute stress. That's why we have a system that helps us fight or flight or freeze or whatever we need to do to cope with that. We're designed to deal with that. We're just not designed to live over in that zone. And that's when it's chronic, when we're in a state of stress constantly, which we often are. So that's stress isn't a bad thing. And I think, it gets a really bad name, but it's chronic stress that we're in. And then we think about stress as sort of someone yelling at us, but stress is actually just like a thing that's like buzzing at you every 5 minutes, or having to reply to a million different people on a million different channels. It's really stressful. Like that is stress.
Just too many different ways of communicating.
And just to be able to we're in a cost of living crisis, that is stressful in itself. But even the act of paying bills, what's my password? What thing do I log on to? Which things do I have to do? And then I have to log on to multiple different tabs to do multiple different things. It's exhausting in and of itself, just the idea of doing it, let alone having the money to do it. It's, we're...
I know you mentioned before about your, when you burn out officially and you kind of said, right, has there been any occasions apart from that, or you can talk about that a bit more if you want, where you were close to that and you've gone, do you know what? I've done this before, I've learned from it, I'm going to utilise what I've known. You've almost kind of stopped yourself getting to that point. Have you got any sort of inspiring stories or even just bits of advice for anyone that might kind of feel like they're getting to that point and to sort of help them not do that?
I think I was definitely living in a chronic state of stress, and I think for me it would be really easy to, I think like I said earlier, you look at some people and they're doing 1,000,001 different things, but they're not burnt out because generally they have those moments of stresses. Generally, they've created the conditions to, and whether that's their window of tolerance or how they've set up their lives, they've created the conditions that allow them to be running. You know, think about a machine, it's got the right lubricant, it's got the right maintenance schedule. They've created, not that we are machines, but they've created the conditions that allow them to thrive. They've also chosen to do things, work, partner, children, lifestyle, that are aligned. So they're doing all the stuff that they want to do, and they've created the conditions that allow them to do it. That's how I try to sort of picture it, and those conditions are holistic.
So do you think you've created those conditions for yourself?
And I think it's a moving feast, right? I never think nothing is static. Like I am always, and I revisit the same, in quotes, struggles all the time. Like, and I think when we accept that we'll do that, like your wounds are your gifts. The things that, in quotes, are my wounds, the things that I struggle with, I will always have. I'll change my relationship with them. Sometimes they'll quieten right down. I come to accept that these things are always going to be with me, and I will revisit and cycle back around. Think of it like an upward growth spiral, but we're revisiting points all the time. And I think when you think of it like that, it's a nice journey because you revisit it and you're like, oh, I'm here again. But I'm, what's the quote? No man, I always say no woman, ever crosses the same river twice. It's not the same river because a river is always moving, and it's not the same woman because you're never the same person. And I love that because you're revisiting things. So I feel like I have the tools to create that now. And I'd say my foundation is a lot more solid, but I'm always, recreating, redesigning and co-creating because I'm always moving and changing. When it comes to the burnout scenario, I think that was just a culmination of moving into, I'd been in a business for about 2 years, and I'd sort of kind of changed industry to be there. And I was in my late 20s. I had this story. I think it was 27 when I started there. And, I was like, oh my gosh, I've had this like career change. I'd only been working for 6 or 7 years, but this big deal, this career that you had, and I'd like slightly rechanged to train. And then I was 27, and you feel, see, now I look back and I'm like, you're so, not so young in a patronizing way, but I validate my feelings. I felt like loads of, people who'd been working for 6 or 7 years in a particular industry, they were really starting to, get promoted, late 20s, earn some, some good money. And I was starting again from scratch. Of course I wasn't, but it felt like that. And so I was in a state of trying to prove myself in a really different cultural environment that had loads of positives, but was very intense. Culturally as a business. It was fast-paced, dynamic, and I kind of in some ways thrived in that environment, but I was completely tuned into being externally validated, completely tuned into making sure I didn't upset anyone. It's very people-pleasy, procrastinating. All of my energy, if you think about the antenna, all of it was external. I had very little thinking about, do I want to do this project or this job or this thing? It was just like, what do people, someone says jump, I say how high. And that was what took the toll on me. I don't think it was, yes, I was working incredibly long hours, but it's all these little things culminated together. It's rarely do people burn out because they're doing lots of stuff. It's doing too much of the wrong stuff, or it's doing stuff for the wrong reasons, or for someone else's reasons. That's when people tend to burn out. Burnout is often relational, either relationship to ourselves or relationships to others, environment around us. It has obviously a physical connotation, but it's not always because you're like running around doing loads. It's again trying to take like a holistic approach to that. My burnout was just that. I was trying to do too much for other people, and I took it on an extra project at work and was like, I have to do this, have to prove myself, and I didn't get rid of any of the other stuff. I would handle the situation so differently now. But I reached that point, and my body physically stopped me. I never had migraines. I had like the worst migraine, and I could barely see out of one eye. Like imagine an eye twitch that you sometimes get, but then at times 100. Like I couldn't. I imagine this is what people who have migraines frequently is like, but my whole head was just in this vice. I went home and I just stopped. I slept for about 3 days. I was throwing up. Like it wasn't a bug, but I just felt kind of like hungover. And I was, I just couldn't. My body stopped me because I needed to stop, and it was really intense. And I think I didn't ever get to that state again, but I really noticed after that. So that was the beginning of 2020. I just turned 30, and for me, that feels. I mean, it doesn't matter, but it feels quite poignant. Like the start of
milestone.
The start of my 30s really was a bit of like my body was like, right, we've entered our 30s. You know, we're just going to start. We're going to stop you. We're going to ground all air traffic, and you're going to learn the lesson, and you're going to do some. And I had the gift of that time that I could stop when I was on furlough in the first lockdown. I then did journey back out into the world much more positively. I had new tools in my armory, or I had been in a state where I was like, oh, this is what it's like to just be me and just be and be authentic and feel healthy and well holistically, not just like my waist is a certain size or I'm running enough. What does enough mean? All of that, which is probably my relationship with myself before. It was like, oh, I'll make a green smoothie and I'll like run more, or go to the gym, because that's what you're supposed to do. That's healthy. Not that it's not, but you can go to the gym in a very unhealthy way as well. Health can come up anywhere. You can help healthy the relationships, healthy dialogue, healthy disagreement, healthy relationships to yourself. It's not just a healthy diet, as much as what we put in our bodies is important. I think the when I visited back round again, I'd say sort of 2 years later, I'd had this quite amazing promotion, and I was running a team of sort of 15. I looked after a P&L. It was all those things of a certain job title, I'm director of this and in charge of things, and I was like, I feel, it was bit by bit it happened, but I could feel myself again back in that unaligned space where if I was really honest with myself, while there were elements of it that felt I wanted to learn, or I felt was a privilege to be in that position, or I felt it was mainly that I felt flattered I'd been asked. Right. And it was mainly that I was like, oh, that's a good thing that you've been asked to do this. And it looks good. And that means you're doing good stuff because someone's asked you to do something. And people think that you're good. People think that you've done a good job. It was mainly fueled by that. And I lived in that state trying to do a good job, and it was so unaligned. It's not what I was meant to be doing. And I burnt out partly because I wasn't working as many hours as before. I didn't burn out because I had that like reference point of what it felt like to really be me and be in quotes well. And I'd visited that place, and I now knew that I had a reference point, whereas before I don't think I had a reference point. I just thought whatever my normal was. And I really felt like being able to get to that place was a really big pivot for me, being able to have that reference point. And then when I was moving away from it, I was like, yeah, okay. And it took me 18 months, 2 years to then have that. I think I mentioned it earlier, come back from that holiday. And it was brewing for a while, but I was like, I'm leaving. And I've made a lot of decisions, I think, like that. I wouldn't have had the language to describe it then, but just intuitively, I arrive at a decision and it's completely clear. Yeah. And I haven't done some sort of like rational thinking about it. Yeah. I have thought about it or known it over many weeks or months, but it's completely clear and I just do it. And I almost find myself doing it without like my brain being engaged. I'm like logging onto something, signing up for something, planning something or doing something. That's intuition. That's intuition for me. It's just sort of happening. It's coming out of me. And I did. And I went in and I felt completely calm. I wasn't questioning myself at all. I didn't have all the answers about what would come next. But I went, no, I'm leaving. And they were completely shocked, very surprised. And I was just like, no, I'm done. I think I said the words, I need to get off the drug. And I didn't mean the drug of anything externally. I meant the drug of me just like trying to validate and just pursue something because I thought, well, I can't not want this because it's a big chunky job title and it looks really good and you'll earn money doing it, which is just not the reason to do anything unless that's aligned to you.
I think like what you've said there, Donna, it's kind of like leading on to you allowing yourself to live more authentically.
Completely.
To say to yourself, do you know what? This isn't aligned with me. And it's so brave to make those decisions. Like they're not easy. No. Like to just go, this isn't making me happy. I'm ending it. I'm getting rid of it. It's going. And it's so hard to do that. But I think once you make that decision and you go, and like you said, it's like sometimes it just comes from a place of like, it's just like a stream of consciousness where you just go, I'm not even thinking about this. I know it's just not right fit. And I'm going to, decide to live my life through myself more authentically, as simply as it is. Has there been like any other example of where you feel like you really have decided to live more authentically as yourself? Because I think obviously you go through a journey, like I'm going through a journey in my late 20s of trying to figure out more about who I am, so then I can show up more authentically to the world and just be happier in myself. But in terms of like when you've done that, so you made that decision, is there any other examples of where you've gone, I'm gonna live my life for me. I'm gonna put myself first, because that's a really powerful example.
Yeah. That's a very, and like the story before, I was away on holiday, I came back in and I hadn't even said tomorrow I'm going to have my notice in. I knew I was, but it wasn't some sort of, I just had a meeting, went in and just said it. And it was completely, I wasn't over analyzing. I was living as a whole body. I keep saying that, but it was just happening. It was unfolding and it was completely right. I think, like, there've probably been lots of examples since. I think maybe that rather than one particular day or moment, just really noticing over the last however many years, as I've allowed myself to slow, and that doesn't mean sleeping or lying down or doing nothing. I've unplugged myself from what for me was plugging in. And I really visualize this like externally. I was plugged into whatever anyone else needed me to do. And I would get my validation or my worth off of whatever. You could plot me in any company. I'd be like, cool, how high are we jumping? What are we doing? I need to be like worthy and prove myself. My intrinsic rather than extrinsic value exists in that muscle of just being. And that journey for me has been just going like, I don't want to go out and do that thing, whether that's going out and like.
Is it more for, I suppose, like, did you make that decision to say to yourself, right, look, like what you said, I'm kind of living through the validation of these other factors.
Yeah.
Was it that kind of decision where you've gone, do you know what, I'm not going to live through that validation of them factors anymore. I'm going to live through the validation of myself and what makes me happy?
I think it's been a journey, like even me leaving where I was previously working. I started out in a more of a like business consulting, change, project program management, and moved into the job I was in where I left, which was a bit more creative, but became less creative the more senior I got. That in itself was me removing myself initially, my first, in quotes, career change at 26, 27. And I've, changed again. And I even that of, that's just me. I'm not saying I'll change. I don't really, I am who I am, and I will find ways to be in the world and in the world that we live in, exchange my services for money because I need to live, whatever that looks like. And I know that I don't have to be dictated to by a specific role. I might find a role that works for me. It's been shedding a lot of that conditioning that I had, which was my career or my job or my role is so defining me. And it really did in my early 20s. And I think even shedding that initial corporate career that I had, to move into something, in quotes, more creative that felt like a big deal and felt like me sort of taking something back and doing what I wanted to do. And then it's just been lots of like chipping away at it. It's never linear. It's been, ups and downs, but it's been chipping away at that stuff. And I kind of see it as shedding a lot of things. And we shed stuff when we're ready, whether that's the conditioning, you're unlearning things that you've, absorbed along the way. And it doesn't have to, it might be that you had one person who said this, who said that, who had an expectation of you. A lot of the time it's not. And I think sometimes we think there's supposed to be that one particular experience or one parent or teacher who said we had to do this. We will have those experiences and stories, but it's really easy not to see how the whole of your experience in this society that we're all raised in is conditioning us a certain way, to be workers in the economy that we're in, to be, productive, to be a certain way as a little boy or a little girl. Or there's so many layers of it. And, there's so many other intersectional ways in which people experience the world that we're conditioned to be or not be. Finding a connection to yourself is becoming yourself, and it's unbecoming all of the things that are helpful to you. But it's also not trying to fix yourself. You're never trying to fix anything. You're never trying to get rid of bad habits, shed a habit or a ritual that is no longer serving you or isn't aligned to where you want to be. You know that it's not what you want. But any habit or coping mechanism that we have, whether that is smoking, chocolate, there's nothing wrong with chocolate, but if we have a relationship with it that's more emotional and we're consuming more chocolate than we would like or is making as well. Like, I'm saying that from personal experience. I love chocolate, but I can have a really nice relationship with chocolate, and sometimes I have an emotional relationship with chocolate or Ben and Jerry. Good old Ben and Jerry. But it's not about shaming ourselves. We don't change from being shamed. We change from being loved. And love is such a misunderstood word in this world. It's not Hallmark. It's not Valentine's Day. Love is an act. Like, it's not the word. Sometimes it's a word, but it's caring for ourselves and accepting ourselves how we are. What's that coping mechanism doing to serve you? I think is the question that we often try to overlook. Like, it has a purpose that it's serving. It's keeping you comforted, self-comforted. It's keeping you safe. It's familiar. It's known. And sometimes, whether it's smoking or whatever, there's a physiological response, but it's kind of getting to a place where you can accept yourself radically as you are, and then create the conditions, as I keep saying that, create the conditions for yourself to evolve and change in a way that you'd like to, not in someone else's image, not in society's image, in a way that works for you. Like, what do you want to do? How do you want to live? If you want a white picket fence and a big fancy house with flower and wall painted rooms, if that brings you joy, truly, do it. But don't do it because you think that that's what looks good or what other people will admire. If you're doing something because you think it will be admired, it's not necessarily going to be aligned.
I read a book once I know what you mentioned about love, and I think it's called All My Love, the book, and the quote in it was, love was defined as the will to extend one's own or another's spiritual wealth, or something like that. I don't think that's the direct quote. But it was really powerful for me when I read that, because I remember I was in LA at the time, and I was on a beach, and I was reading it, and I was like, that makes so much sense, because that defines, like, it's like almost like filling up your cup to then I don't know. I thought it was interesting.
I love that.
Have you got any like book quotes or a song or any quotes or anything that inspires you, that you kind of live through or live by?
Gosh, this is the bit where I'm like, probably loads, and then your mind goes back. It's like someone says, think of a film, and you're like, I can't think of a single film. Or like, what's your favourite song? And you're like, the only song that I can ever think of, or the only film is E.T., and the only song is like Jingle Bells. I'm like, there are so many more songs and films. For some reason, it'll be something like that, like Baba, Black Sheep, or whatever. I think that the one I said earlier, which is more of a recent one for me, that I've sort of revisited, that sort of, it's okay to revisit the same moments or journeys or whatever struggles again. Like, that is what life is about, and that's what my journey and everyone's unique journey is about. No woman ever crosses the same river twice, for it's not the same river and it's not the same woman. I'm going to keep saying woman, not man. But like that's really meaningful to me at the moment. And the one that my so cliched, my therapist said to me, like my therapist, as we were in LA on the week recently, I'd like, any advice on anything, if you can have access to or afford therapy, it's a wonderful space, whether therapy works for you or whether it's coaching, but just having a safely held space.
Changed my life.
Yeah. Me too. It's been amazing. At the moment, I'm seeing my therapist again, and I see her once every 2 weeks. It's game changing, and my ability to be honest and truthful with not just her, that's a space, but it's myself in that space is radically different from how it was 5 years ago, and I get so much more value out of it, and that in itself is game changing. What was I saying? The quote she said, She said, remember, you're a human being, not a human doing, and it's so simple. You're a human being, not a human doing. And it's a quote. It's not, but it's so true. Like, and this was at that time I first started speaking to her in 2020, and I was completely burnt out, and it stuck with me, and it still sticks with me now. Like, I'm here to do, because I want to achieve things and create things and enjoy my life and have an impact, whatever people want to do, whether you want to make money, create a life for yourself, whatever it is, or just have a positive impact, whatever that looks like for each of us. I'm also just on this earth, like all the other animals on this earth. I am just here to be. I'm not designed to achieve. Even if you run a marathon, the way that we do it now is in like an organized race with a time chip. And so then you're on leaderboard, and then you probably post an Instagram post about it with like the medal and then your time. Not everyone might, but that's what, like, when you run a marathon, you go and do it. Like, imagine running with no timer on and no one knowing that you're doing it. Like, if someone runs a marathon, like,
do it, I think.
yeah. And there's nothing wrong in that, but it's just so interesting. Like, it's not just about doing for the sake of an external validation or a sort of, if you still run a marathon, like if a tree falls in a forest and there's no one to hear it, doesn't make a sound. Like, if someone in London runs a marathon but it's not timed and no one saw it, did it even happen? You know, if it's not on Instagram, yeah, and that's obviously not even being, that's still doing, but just you're a human being, not a human being.
I suppose it's like the whole essence of this conversation kind of comes back to being present, and being present means that you can connect with yourself better, which then in turn means that you can live life more authentically, which then in turn means you're going to live a more fulfilling life that relates back to your own spiritual or whatever, like internal happiness and general wellness.
Yeah,
I kind of sum up the whole episode.
Yeah. It's the connection piece is massive. Actually, like the coaching framework that I've kind of, I'd say, designed, that's evolved, and the way that I kind of work is based on kind of those the four C's, four connections. Like, and I work with people with those. It's connection to yourself, connection to others, which is a huge part. You know, the health and state of your connection to yourself, like self-knowledge, self-awareness, how we treat ourselves, directly impacts how we connect to others. You know, Gabor Mate, if you haven't read any Gabor Mate, I would highly encourage you to. I love him. There's probably quotes that he has, but I don't remember any of them. But he, you know, children or humans, when we're young, will sacrifice our authenticity for attachment, because we need that attachment to survive. Like, you're completely dependent as a child on the attachment to your primary carer. And so we will sacrifice our authenticity if we perceive it to be not okay, and it will harm that attachment, right? So we won't be crying if crying doesn't get us the attachment we need. We will make crying noises if that attachment seems to be dwindling. If someone's looking at a phone, he will articulate it much better than me. But our relationship to others is key. We exist in connection with others. So connection to yourself, connection to others, connection to your conditions. That's what I keep talking about, creating the conditions that make us thrive: physical, mental, emotional, social, spiritual. You know, the environment around you, like what you eat, what you breathe, what you read, all of those conditions, where you work. And then, you know, connection to the present moment. You just talked about presence. Like, if we're a plant, plants grow and evolve and adapt to what is present because they are only present. And if we are not in the present moment, we're either living in some future that doesn't exist except in our minds, or living in the past. And we often are. The past and the future are helpful concepts, but we're not living in the present. We're not adapting and evolving and changing to what is now. So yeah, that's I love the connection theme.
Yeah. So, like, I suppose then, just to finish on, what one piece of advice would you give your younger self? And by younger self, it's up to you which age, because by the sounds of what we've spoke about, your late 20s were quite pivotal. So maybe if you want to talk to her, or you could talk to, I don't know, teenage you, or whoever you want to talk to. If she was here in the room, what advice would you give her? Sitting here as 35, right?
Not yet.
34?
Not quite yet. 34.
34-year-old Sarah.
It's there in my head as an impending birthday. Probably would go back younger than, like, maybe teens or something like that.
Yeah.
Gosh, there's so much I'd want to say. It won't be particularly like concise, but it would definitely be something around, like, dial inwards, connect to yourself. Like, who you are is good enough. Like, stop. If I could just dial down that focus I had of tuning in to what everyone else needed or wanted me to be, or what I thought they wanted me to be, it would be something around that. Just, everything's going to be okay no matter what you do. It will all be okay. You can do hard things. Like, live for yourself earlier. Don't wait until you're, 30. However, saying that, I think that would have helped me, definitely. But I really don't live from a place of regret. I believe I was meant to go through all of that and have all that experience.
The advice you give it, and you've already done.
Yeah, and I wasn't ready. Like, every stage of your life that you're at, you're right where you're meant to be, and I was right where I meant to be, and I was, and also in all of that, we pathologize our past, but you also just self-knowledge and coming to understand yourself, looking back and understanding some of those edges. With every strength has an edge. And with all of that experience, being tuned into the environment around me and in quotes on its edge, people pleasing, but also just being really aware of what was going on in certain rooms or dynamics isn't unuseful, and all the experience that I've had has taught me so much. And all of those states are reference points for me to be like, wasn't aligned there. So it's all led me to where I am. And I wouldn't necessarily tell myself to change. I guess I would love to instill, I think probably at the age I'm at now, I'd probably be speaking more to, rather than looking back at myself, I'd be speaking to a future child that I have, and how I would create the conditions for them to be authentic and understand there is pressure and expectation. But I think to your point earlier, you were talking about, gosh, no one is thinking about us as much as, and not in a negative way, the ones that we love are thinking about us, but no one in any dynamic or room or whatever, when we're criticizing ourselves, is thinking the things that we're saying to ourselves. They're probably thinking about themselves. But also everything else that we think people are thinking or saying about us is a little nugget of wisdom about yourself, because you've created that in your head. Yes, of course, sometimes people go, and say mean things or pass comment. Most of the noise in our heads is about ourselves. So we've constructed it. So that's quite an interesting stuff to look at and inquire about, because we're saying it about ourselves. Yeah. And also whatever we say or think about others, and we are all judging a lot of the time, it's part of who we are and how we're made. That's stuff that can tell you, that's useful information. Whatever we don't like in others, whatever we can't tolerate in others or the world around us, is probably what we can't tolerate in ourselves. Yeah. So all of that stuff that we're thinking about and all of that stuff that we're looking at, it's all wisdom if we choose to use it with self-compassion.
Yeah, I love that. Yes, I think that's the only thing I was going to say as well. Is there anything that you want to share with our listeners about your work and your personal projects? I can attest. Is attest the right word? I've done your coaching courses and it was incredible, and that's why obviously we're here today, because I wanted to give you a platform to tell people, teach people what you know, but also, if there's anyone listening that's really interested in your projects and things, where can they find you, and what have you got coming up that people can get involved in?
Thank you. I loved having you. I loved having you in that cohort. It was a really special cohort. So I run a business called Lead with Health, and that is where I do all of my coaching. So one-to-one coaching. I offer kind of a one-to-one coaching programs. I'm actually launching something next year that's going to look at sort of longer coaching programs than the one that we did over sort of the course of a month. And there'll be a mix of, you'll be in a group, but you'll have one-to-one and group experiences. And that will run over a couple of months, probably launching at the beginning of February. So leadwithhealth.com is the website, the Lead with Health Coach or Lead with Health on Instagram. I kind of face off into individuals, but I also work with businesses. So I have one-to-one coaching where people will come and find me as an individual. And that's what some of those programs will be about. But I also work with leaders and teams in businesses. So I'll do either team days, half days, workshops, or sort of holistic health and well-being workshops and courses possibly sometimes, or I'll do some sort of all sorts of things. I work with businesses and individuals, and check out things on Instagram or on the website, and you can contact me on either of those, and just looking out for things. There'll be stuff brewing up in January that will be going a bit bigger than it has this year, which is exciting.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me today on this, and I've learned so much. And I can't wait to listen to it back, so I can learn even more of the stuff that I've not retained, because there was a lot of information, but amazing information. And just thank you so much. For anyone listening, if anything here has resonated with you or you've enjoyed this episode, please like it, comment, share, drop either of us direct messages, and get involved with the coaching series that Sarah's got coming up, because they sound incredible. I'll definitely be getting involved. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you on the next episode.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
You're welcome.